These are the sounds that you might have heard hauling tobacco to market in Richmond in 1780. Welcome to Founding Footprints, a podcast tracing the legacy of the Revolutionary era in Albemarle County and in Charlottesville. I'm Dr. Ben Bernard. Thanks for listening. In this first episode, we'll consider a technology central to the economy of the region in the years around 1800 and to local culture today. 2.5 centuries ago, before cargo trucks or trains, Albemarle County depended on a different kind of technology to ship goods to market. Starting in the 1770s, merchants loaded flat-bottom boats with goods to ship down the James River to sell in Richmond. And one of the region's most fun summer festivals today, now celebrating its 40th year, commemorates that history. The Batteau Festival, held from June 14th to 21st in 2025. To learn more, I drove out to Scottsville to meet with the founders of the James River Batteau Company. Could you guys introduce yourselves for our listeners?
Sure. I'm Will Cash, co-owner of James River Batteau Company, river enthusiast.
My name is Will Smith. Will Cash and I are high school buddies, been involved in several businesses together, so we go back a long ways.
Oh, awesome. Okay, and so you bonded over your shared first name?
Obviously, yeah. It's how most people meet, yeah.
I'd say that may have been part of it as kids.
Well, here it's worth explaining a little bit about what the James River Batteau Festival is.
So the Batteau Festival is where about 10 to 20 of these boats all start in Lynchburg, and we kind of recreate the Batteau journey. So it's an 8-day festival from Lynchburg to Maiden's Landing, so just upriver from Richmond. We've been a part of that as a boat for 19 years. We've been doing that. But maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. His father actually got him into this whole thing.
I didn't have a choice of whether I was going to be on a Batteau or not. I was kind of deemed before I got here. So my dad built his first Batteau in 1988. I was born in 87, so I've had a Batteau in my family as long as I've been around. He built the boat with his junior high school shop class, because he used to be a shop teacher, and so it was a project with his kids, and then grew into something that was important to him every year. And he went on to be chairman of the Batteau Festival for a long time, and is currently still very involved in Batteau stuff. So ever since I was a kid, I spent a lot of time on these boats, and slowly began recruiting friends into it as time went on. And Will and I think we got on a Batteau the year we graduated high school, was the first year that we took a boat down as a crew.
Did you have a sense that maybe making boats was an unusual thing, or?
Not really. In my home, this was just a normal, unconditional part of the summer, where the entire summer kind of revolved around the Batteau Festival, and my dad was also helping other people build boats, and we were just always in that community. So no, it wasn't until later that I realized how kind of bizarre it was to grow up in this in the middle of this community.
You mentioned the Batteau Festival as a kind of modern festival that's recreating the Batteau journey. Could you tell me more about what that was?
Sure. So these boats were used to bring tobacco and goods down from kind of the Piedmont region of Virginia to the markets of Richmond. And so it'd be stuff like flour, lumber, coal, but priority was definitely tobacco. 1775 was the original Batteau, was when that started, and that went into around 1840. And maybe a little bit further on, you basically have a canal that starts in 1840. And so at that point in time, the kind of open river vessel now goes on to they built their own river basically, because it was so difficult for the men out here. And then railroad's going to take over from there.
Why do you think the 1770s is the moment when this takes off?
So that was largely based on the realities of industrial tobacco. So tobacco is really harsh crop on soil. And so over time, they are wearing out soil in the tidewater regions, and every year having to move further and further out, as also population is growing to get to fertile growing fields for tobacco. And so as you're pushing further and further west, you're also pushing further and further away from the markets, meaning you now need more organized ways to get all of your large volume produce like tobacco from the Piedmont. The Batteau is really one of the very first stepping stones in this, trying to get tobacco exported from Central Virginia to European markets.
We were learning earlier about the enslaved labor and plantation economy in the region. Places like Monticello for Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe's Highland. It seems like a kind of shipping system and boats are a counterpart to that. You can't have a kind of industrial scale or agricultural economy going without shipping. So maybe these pieces fit together.
Absolutely. It should always be said that the vast majority of men that would have been operating Batteau out on the James River would have been enslaved African Americans. Wow. You also had large freed communities out here running boats as well. There also would have been a subset of poor whites running boats, but this is largely going to be enslaved labor out here. And so these men are going to be quite literally the muscle that is moving all of the millions of pounds of tobacco from these markets down to the Tidewater.
What else do you tell your visitors about the history of this period? I mean, is this part of the experience that they get when they come out on the boats?
Yeah, there's three main things we want everybody who joins one of our cruises to know, and that is why these boats existed, who the men would have been that would have been navigating them, what their lives would have been like, and why it is such an integral part of understanding the Virginia that we're all living in today.
I'm excited to take the boat tour to hear all these things.
Sure.
Without maybe spoiling everything for our listeners, could you give us a little bit of a sense of what the lives were like of the people who were running these boats?
Sure. I mean, this would have been very strenuous work. You know, unfortunately for these men, tobacco harvest happens in mid to late summer. So as a result of that, the water you see here is not what you would see in the summer. We lose about 2 feet from what we'll see. So lots of rocks, lots of obstacles. That's going to be strenuous for these men. There's ledges in this river that are extremely shallow, and so at times they're literally going to have to unload all their tobacco off their boats, drag the boats across rocks, reload the tobacco, and keep going down. So it was a lot of physical labor. I think one of the stories we read was just around the bend here. There were 40 or 50 boats all hung up within a couple hundred yards of each other, and literally had to traverse the river 3 or 4 times just to make it that 100 yards. So hence why a canal would be coming after that.
Listeners can't see these boats that we're on. So these boats that we're currently on are 45 feet long, 7.5 feet wide.
It's like a tractor trailer kind of length.
Exactly. And this is going to be kind of a short Batteau. So these boats would vary quite a lot, but they could get up to 70 feet long. So when you're imagining them unloading and dragging these boats over rocks, you're talking about a boat that's going to weigh several thousand pounds, that's going to have 10 to 12,000 pounds of tobacco on it. So, you know, this is not exactly going to be like pulling your canoe over the rocks.
What kind of experience can people expect?
We always start with the history, and then we get upriver. We try to kind of take in the night scene of the Batteaus, which was an important part for the men out here as well. 15 or 20 boats would usually gather in a same spot. Often at that point, they would literally light fires on these boats. They would cook on these boats, and then often after food is done, there's stories of kind of music. The whiskey bottle is also quite present in the stories. We try to kind of recreate some of that. It's also what we've done on the Batteau Festival. You know, a lot of times in the evenings on the festival, we'll have 4 or 5 boats all kind of tied together, kind of slow float into camp, and we do something similar in that way as well. So part of that's going to be a little bit of food. We're going to have some live music. You can let people get out of their busy lives and just kind of be in nature and enjoy the scenery out here on the river.
It's so different from kind of walking into a marble museum to look at like 18th century stuff, and instead we're kind of being immersed in this experience.
You can read about these things in a book all you want, but you can envision what it would have been like to push a boat like this loaded up with tobacco when you're on it watching someone push the boat. You can imagine what relief would have been at the end of a very hot day when you're sitting there with your nice glass of cold rosé. Obviously, we're not pretending to work as hard as these men did, but just giving an idea of the joy that would have been at the end of a day like that, and just even the slightest amount to try to understand what their lives would have been like is part of what we're trying to provide out here.
What does that mean to you guys?
I grew up in Amherst County. The boat itself was invented in Amherst County, and a lot of these communities, like we live here in Scottsville, they largely grew up to service this. And so it's a part of life here in southern Albemarle County that, whether people know it or not, we're interacting with every single day. And the ability to enlighten people and to kind of shine a flashlight on something that is the reason that, a town like Scottsville exists. And seeing that light bulb go off in people's heads is a special thing.
What is rewarding for me is a lot of people are kind of looking at their phones these days. A lot of people are on screens, and being out in nature and doing things like this will be something that people are craving at the same time, right? I think it's great we can provide that for people and also get them out here and learn something pretty cool about the local area that most people don't know about.
We want people to have their cell phones so they can take these pretty pictures of how beautiful it is up here in the river and put it all over social media. So, a lot of people look at the boats almost like a blank canvas. We've had proposals on this boat. We've had people do something similar to a rehearsal dinner on the boat. And so I think just anytime you're out on the water, it's just going to be beautiful, especially the James at sunset. And these boats just kind of blend into the surroundings. Some people are coming directly for the history. Some people are coming because it looks like a very beautiful evening on the water. I think everybody leaves with an appreciation of what these boats accomplished out here, and especially the men that navigated them.
It turns out that this is a pretty special year for the Batteau Festival.
So this is the 250th anniversary of the invention of this boat this year. And so that's obviously very special and also coincides quite neatly with the, all the VA 250 celebrations. So that's exciting. Also, the 40th annual James River Batteau Festival is this year. And, Will had mentioned the canal earlier. Well, the canal would have its terminus down in Richmond, and there was a large canal basin. This is where they would sell all the tobacco, and all the goods coming on and upriver are getting loaded up in this area. Well, the reason we have a Batteau Festival is because in the 80s, 1983, they're excavating to build the James Center, which is one of the big high-rises in Richmond. And they end up discovering a bunch of these boats that had sank in that canal basin. And these are the first time that anybody in modern history has put their eyes on a Batteau. And so this archaeological find is what kicked off a modern interest in these boats. And so very quickly after that, in short order, there was a guy named Joe Ayers who built the first modern Batteau, and many people from communities surrounding the James decided to get involved with this, and that is the Batteau Festival. So if you would go back to the late 80s and ask the people that started this festival, if 40 years later we would still be building boats and you would be on your second generation of people that's doing this, and maybe a third someday, they would think this is some kind of minor miracle. The James River Batteau Festival will launch up in Lynchburg on June 14th, and we'll be doing 120 miles on the river over the course of 8 days, getting to Maiden's Landing. I would always recommend that people come down and join the James River Batteau Festival. It's often can be portrayed as a spectator sport, but I think it is best enjoyed on the water. So if building your own Batteau sounds like, a bridge too far, a lot of people bring canoes and kayaks and join us for a day or for the whole week. So I will always recommend that as, I think, one of the coolest folk life events that happens in Virginia every year.
Scottsville's a great place to come kind of see the festival. It's the only town we come across, so it's a lot of energy coming into that.
Well, you generally can't go very far in Scottsville without seeing Batteau imagery. So, the town seal is a Batteauman. Canal Basin Square Park, which is where we meet our guests, is a whole park dedicated to river and Batteau history. The other thing I'd like to ask your listeners to do is for everyone to pray for rain for the Batteau Festival this year. We've had 2 drought years in a row where every Batteau in the fleet has taken some knocks, and we've done a lot of that dragging over rocks that we mentioned the Batteaumen would have done.
This is kind of another big question that I know historians in my field are really interested in, is the history of the environment and climate. I'd be curious if you guys have a sense of, has the course of the river changed? Has the ecology changed since the 1770s in a way that might have impacted the experience of the boats?
The James River, being an East Coast river next to lots of industry, has taken some blows through industrialization. And so I think it's quite obvious that the actual fish populations and ecology of the river is not what it would have been then. Now, that said, this entire movement of American civilization into this area was really its own form of environmental degradation and impact. So, for instance, one of the stories we tell is the initial boats that people were using to take down before the invention of the Batteau was what they called the double dugout canoe. In order to build these, you needed the biggest old-growth trees, and it only took about 20 years for those to run out.
Wow.
So it's also part of the story. Tobacco itself is an extremely destructive crop on soil. So that's, again, going to play a role in just the very beginning of the history. As far as climate, we read a quote by Jefferson where he says, I'm not going to get it perfect, but there was nearly no days missing between the water was too low for me to get my boats downriver and when the river would freeze. The river is not, it's not freezing these days. And so that is certainly something that the Bataumen would have dealt with that we do not.
How do you build these boats?
It's a process. Well, luckily we have Bull's dad to kind of stand on his shoulders some. You start with the rib sections, and from there you build it upside down. Then you start doing the nose cones, lots of different compound angles. That's probably the trickiest part of the boat to build. And then you just basically run planking up and down all the ribs, and then eventually you got to flip it over and finish the top cap rail here.
And you guys do this yourselves. How long does it take to build a boat?
It took us about 4 or 5 weeks, and that was 40, 50-hour weeks going for it. The challenging part is getting the lumber. So some of this lumber is 35 to 40 feet long, and no knots, no cracks in the wood. You kind of have to get all the right lumber for it, so your boat's also not leaking as well. One of the things we do is you'll see the stuff between the seams of the boards. This is called oakum. It's a hemp material. It's kind of soaked in like a pine tar of sorts. At the end of the season, we let the boats dry out. That opens up these gaps in the boards. We repack that oakum, and then we go and we take them and we sink them in a pond. They swell back up, and that's what gives us our watertight seal. So that's something we do every year. Obviously, the sun also plays a role in kind of beating up the wood out here, so occasionally we got to replace boards in different areas.
I'm just curious if you guys experience that tension between going for the maximal authenticity versus what will make a kind of enjoyable experience for people, and how to balance those two commitments.
A challenge to start with was, will people show up for a boat they don't even know about? I feel like a lot of what we came up with here was what we really enjoy about the boats on the festival and kind of that camaraderie. And so we really wanted to kind of showcase that, but also make sure we're kind of giving our due to the history and those that came before us as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to see us out here with a with a bateau built out of Trex decking or something like that, right? So there's certainly hard lines as far as the way that the boats are built with white oak. They're packed with oakum, and that's important to us. You're not going to see us navigating a plastic bateau out here, put it that way. Well, the one thing you will see us doing is the boats going upriver often had 6 men manning them, and so you would often need quite a lot of manpower. Will does use the pole. I like to call him the engine and the muscle. He does have a little backup, which is our Minn Kota trolling motor back there, which does give him a little bit of a boost and make sure that he doesn't start protesting me back.
When we started the company, we said, we'll just pull it around. But that was pretty short-lived.
So I've heard about Farm to Bateau with Sarah Rennie and Two Fire Table. Could you tell me a little bit about this project?
This is, I think, one of the most exciting things we've gotten going in the last couple of years. Sarah is a mutual friend of ours and had reached out about whether we ever needed any chef services on the boats. And it just so happens that the way that the men would have cooked in these boats was over an open fire. Sometimes they're going to pile dirt up in between a rib section. Some of the boats were fancy enough that they had a brick hearth built. And so we thought it would be an incredible thing to showcase just the bounty of agriculture that comes out of Southern Albemarle and to showcase that out on a local historical boat. We put on a dinner series where we're doing 14 of them this year. 5 or 6 courses often, it kind of varies a little bit, but it's all highlighting local food from around this part. So it also kind of highlights part of the Bateau experience. The 2 staples you read about them eating a lot are ash cake, which would have been kind of like a cornbread. And then they also had a lot of bacon, salt-cured bacon. So she's kind of taken that and turned it into something probably a little bit more exciting, where there's it's these hominy griddle cakes that also have pork belly in them. And so it is largely, again, a celebration of the community that the boats would have hosted amongst the men back in the day, and then also bringing community down here to the James River in 2025.
After the interview, Will and Will invited me onto the boat for their sunset cruise. They told stories of the people who piloted these boats centuries ago. They told us about that history. We lit candles, folks opened wine or beer, the hosts brought out some charcuterie boards. At one point, they even brought out a guitar and sang tunes while we enjoyed the spring sunset.
James River Blues.
It really made me think about how economic change also shaped culture centuries ago, that these boats led to a new culture for workers out on the water. I also learned that our understanding of plantations and of enslaved labor in the region is incomplete without understanding how those goods that were produced there got to market. And finally, I thought about how we can still enjoy a summer sunset and a warm night out on the water after a good day's work.
James River Blues.
That's our first episode. In future installments, we'll hear from other leaders of historic organizations in the region about the legacy of the Age of Revolutions here. I'm Dr. Ben Bernard. Thanks for listening.
Founding Footprints is a VA 250 project, America, made in Virginia. This podcast is a production of the Virginia Audio Collective at WTJU 91.1 FM, hosted by Dr. Benjamin Bernard with sound design by Sage Tanguay and music provided by Blue Dot Sessions. If you'd like to explore the history of Charlottesville and Albemarle County, you can find more information at visitcharlottesville.org. Virginia is for history lovers.